Welcome, everybody, to our webinar series on Thursday. This week's topic is addressing objections to curriculum. This is a very important topic because we do have some statutory objections that everyone should be aware of, as well as just a topic that's been in the news a lot. So we're going to get started. I'm going to bring in my one of my colleagues, Eliza Kaye, who is going to get us started this afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Dana. Hi, everyone. My name's Eliza Kaye. I'm an associate here at Franczek. And today we are presenting on curriculum objections, like Dana had mentioned. Just getting through. So we've seen a lot of curriculum objections in the news and in the media, but not as much about what to do with them. We at Franczek have started to develop a toolkit that Dana is going to talk about a bit later in the presentation, about how districts can handle curriculum objections, how to process them, how to respond to parents, policy recommendations, and then we also have documents that we suggest using when kind of handling these curriculum objections. So here on this first slide are just a few kind of news headline of things that we've seen a lot of, and I'm sure you all have too, and just examples of what types of curriculum objections parents are tending to make. But we've also started to see kind of objections to curriculum opt-out requests or curriculum objections. Most recently in the Fourth Circuit, which although Illinois is not part of, it still is an interesting case to see how other federal courts are kind of dealing with these issues. And in Maryland, parents, a group of parents had kind of they're suing the school district for not allowing them to opt their kids out of certain types of curriculum, and specifically in this case it was a group of books that were, I guess, being permitted to be read in schools. They weren't required curriculum, but they were part of the library and I think the ELA curriculum, and these parents had an objection to it, but there were no opt-out policies for this district, and they sued the school district saying that the fact that there was no opt-out opportunity was a violation of their free exercise of religion and their right to parent their children. The court basically said they did not meet their burden of saying that the lack of an opt-out opportunity was violating their exercise of religion, but it'll be interesting to see what happens later on if the parents do appeal the case. And then also we have a little news headline about the Southern Poverty Law Center recently flagging the Naperville-based Awake, Illinois, which I'm sure some of you have heard of or are familiar with, as a hate group. And this isn't a legal, I guess, a legal title now that they have. It's just Southern Poverty Law Center just has kind of a reputation within the legal community of I guess deeming certain groups as hate groups, and that you can look at their map of hate groups across the country. So it's interesting that they now are deeming this group one of those. And Awake Illinois is a group that does kind of rally towards allowing parents to opt out of certain types of curriculum, such as LGBTQ books or curriculum that is related to that.
Yeah, this is sort of an interesting thing because Awake Illinois was very active in Illinois post-pandemic. Definitely some of you may have seen some of their vaccine objection forms. They actually came up, I think, with one large form that objected to many different not only curriculum, but many different rules. So this is sort of a major bit of news. They also ran several slates for certain boards of education throughout the state. So I think being deemed a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center is really, sort of quite alarming, I think, considering some of their past activism in the Illinois public school arena. So let's talk about what our agenda is for today. Today, we're going to talk mostly about individual objections to curricula and how those come about. So what the legal framework for that is in Illinois, what parents can actually object to, the right to curriculum review by the public and the right to make objections. Those are two separate things. We're going to also talk about some best practices for handling it. And we really are highlighting today our curriculum objection toolkit, which is sort of a one-stop thing that can really help school administrators process these in a fair, objective, and efficient manner, because this can take a lot of time when you have someone that is really adamant and has a lot of questions, and sort of being prepared for that and having a framework for it can save a lot of time. So starting off with the legal framework for this. So Illinois, just generally curriculum in Illinois, and we can go to the next slide. The school board is who has the authority to set the curriculum. That being said, curriculum is not set in a vacuum. It's not like school boards can go off and decide what they want to teach, or have a school that has, that is very focused on what their personal views are. We have the Illinois State Board of Education and the Illinois State Standards, which are part of the statute. And there's certain things that need to be taught and need to be provided by public school districts. But ultimately, it's the board has the authority to adopt the curriculum. We don't see this very often. We don't see boards adopt curriculum, and we generally don't advise that they do this in a very overt manner, because sometimes it just draws attention, I think, to things which probably shouldn't have attention drawn to them. Although if you're adopting something that's radically new, a new series, spending money, it is likely wise to have a open board discussion about that and have a discussion for the community to hear. Transparency on the front end can often help a lot on the back end and result in fewer objections that you're seeing. So just quick review of all the learning standards. There's, of course, all the major subjects, but then there's also little random school code requirements that we have to make sure that we're teaching. And these are all like in Article 27 of the school code. Some examples of things that have to be taught. There needs to be a unit on civics. Most recently, there was, or fairly recently, there was an amendment requiring playtime in the elementary school, and that's actually part of the curriculum, that you're going to have some unstructured outdoor or indoor playtime. So it's not like there's a lot of variety in this. It's not like people are off doing things on their own. Really, there is a public school program that, as a state and through the General Assembly, that we've decided what's important, and that's what school districts are implementing on a daily basis. So talking about the impact of the First Amendment. So under Illinois law, there are some statutory objections. So there are objections that are carved into our school code, where parents can say, I object to this based on this statutory objection. I would like my child to not participate in this part of the curriculum. And those are very specific, and Eliza will go through those. There's also objections that can be based on a student or parent's First Amendment right to free exercise of religion. So if a student feels that some particular course of study or being involved in something is a violation of their religion, that is an accommodation, that might be an accommodation that you need to make in accordance with the First Amendment. I think we see a lot of these with particular religious groups, sometimes being opposed to music class or dancing. And if this is, if this is brought to you, to your district's attention, this is something that you do need to review seriously. If you have questions, you should consult with legal counsel, because it is very important that we, respect and observe students' First Amendment rights for the free exercise of their religious beliefs.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of go over now the right to curriculum review and objections. Dana started to touch on this in the last few slides. So Under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, which is a federal law, parents have the right to receive notice and an opportunity to opt a student out of a few certain items, one of which is any protected information survey. Another is any non-emergency invasive physical examination or screening required by the local educational agency as a condition of attendance. And the last one is activities of an LEA involving collection, disclosure, or use of personal information collected from students for the purpose of marketing or sale. So notice in those three things, curriculum is not one of those federally recognized rights to opt your child out of. Under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, parents do have the right to inspect upon request instructional material, excluding academic tests or assessments. So within that, parents are able to request inspection of certain curriculum, which we do advise that school districts, allow parents to inspect it upon request, but that doesn't mean they need necessarily copies of it. And again, they should not be receiving tests or assessments. But there really is no absolute right to opt out your student of certain curriculum. However, in Illinois, there are a few, subjects that parents do have the right to opt their kids out and these are listed right here. Although the Illinois General Assembly states, the primary purpose of schooling is the transmission of knowledge and culture through which children learn in areas necessary to their continuing development and entry into the world of work. These are recognized as more controversial topics that parents do have the right to say they don't want their kids learning them in school. So I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but, objections based on board policy. Districts may write into their board policy that parents can opt their students out of certain curriculum and materials that are in addition to the previous slide and the listed items there. So this is just an example. A board policy may permit parental opt-out from an R-rated movie viewing. This is not required for boards to do this, but it is, it's optional and they can do it. And then kind of circling back to the religious objections, this is kind of another avenue for parents to attempt to opt their students out of certain curriculum that they believe goes against their religion or beliefs. However, it can be, I guess, a bit gray in terms of when to allow a student to be opted out based on religious objections. And on this next slide, we kind of discuss the the factors that districts should consider when they do receive a request for a religious exemption. And like it is listed here, the curriculum must burden the student's religion. And these are just some factors to consider. Does the district have a secular purpose for the curriculum? Is the primary purpose of the material to endorse or establish a religion? And does the material have a coercive effect that operates against the parent's religion? I think generally speaking, and Dana, feel free to jump in here, but I think it's generally better to err on the side of caution when dealing with religious exemption requests, because we don't want to then see later parents suing the district for, violation of their First Amendment rights. But Dana,
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that we do get a lot of objections, religious-based objections, not just to curriculum, but to also vaccinations, but you do have to review those very carefully. I think the standard is, there is a huge deference, and, I'm not commenting on, the appropriateness of that, but there is a huge deference in the law to people being able to freely exercise their religious beliefs. And I think you need to contemplate that. And I think it's also important to be reasonable, even when people are asking you for things that on the face may be reasonable. I think it's important to treat those respectfully and try to respond respectfully. And if you have any doubts or questions, or you have concerns about granting a particular request, it's definitely a good idea to just get a quick legal opinion. Because I do think, we've known from going through the pandemic that, there are different, there are parents that can file a lawsuit. There are also different special interest groups that can file lawsuits. And, it's very difficult sometimes to respond to those lawsuits because you're responding not only legally, but in the court of public opinion. And you're, perhaps attracting a lot of attention to things that really aren't your focus and really sort of detract from your educational mission and really serving students and serving the families in your community. So something to definitely keep in mind. And we should also mention that if anyone has questions as we go through, it looks like we have a fairly manageable group to go ahead and put those in either, you can put them in the Q&A feature, and we will try to answer those as we go through.
Thanks, Dana. And then one other thing I wanted to mention before I pass it back off to Dana to discuss best practices. Although there are certain curriculum topics under Illinois law that parents can legally opt their kids out of, the school code is silent about how parents and guardians may request their child's attendance be waived. So we recommend that districts have procedures in place to notify parents when these topics will be discussed and the process for opting out of instruction. And as Dana said, seek legal advice if you are concerned or confused about what the answer might be, because some of these situations are kind of tricky and do fall in the gray area. Okay, so now I'm going to pass. Dana, yeah, thanks.
Sure. So I think Eliza just hit on one of the very most important, I think, best practices is, making sure that you're communicating with parents through your normal channels of communication about what it is you teach. What is in your curriculum? What is the focus for first grade? What's the focus for second grade? This is something that you should be doing through your open houses, through your communications to parents. When you are teaching something that may be considered controversial or is on the list of things that we put up that are things that parents can opt out of under Illinois law, like dissections or teaching about sex, it is good to be transparent about that. The last thing you want is for someone to come home to their parent and say, today we learned about blah, 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 and have it be a very controversial subject. And some of the parents are going to take offense to that because they didn't have the opportunity to discuss with their child that particular topic or, talk about their family values or their family viewpoint around a particular topic. So I think just being transparent is sort of the number one thing. It's making sure people know what you're teaching. I mean, teaching is it's fundamental to our democracy, but it's also fundamental, I think, to the trust that parents have in your school community to be transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing it, what the purpose of it is, and making sure you're reaffirming that for everyone on a regular basis. So looking at board policy, you want to have a clear board policy on how people can object. You want to articulate these things in the law for people. You also want to have some sort of way that people can inspect curriculum. And note that the school code has a provision in it. So parents can always object to curriculum under one of the statutory objections or based on their First Amendment rights or their religious beliefs. But the public can also request to inspect curriculum. And this is in the school code as well. It's always very hard to find. I believe it's an article. I'm not going to say where it is. It's in between Article 27 and Article 29. I wish I had that sort of encyclopedic knowledge of where things are. But if you are curious and you have a question, we can find it for you. But any member of the public can inspect your curricula. And we did receive a lot of these requests. A lot of these requests are over DEI curriculum, over books that may address topics that are considered LGBTQ topics, although some of them you're not even sure why they're asking to inspect. I mean, I think the most unusual curriculum objection I've ever received was one about people that ate bugs as a source of protein. I had an objection to that. It was like, that's inhumane that we would have children read about eating bugs. It was actually a very high interest book. The kids loved it. So you never know what you're going to get an objection to. Having an objection form, a rubric for how you're going to review these, and form response letters. And again, this is all part of our toolkit, which is a very modest flat fee that we charge for it. It's customizable. You can get it in Word format or in Google Docs and adapt it to the purposes of your district. So how you respond to objections, and I don't know if we really want to say preventing objections. I don't know that you want to prevent objections because I think they're going to come. I think the best way to prevent them is, again, to be transparent, but not every request to be objected needs a legalistic response. I think that one of the things that we also want to remember when responding to these things is use common sense. So you're going to have you might have a parent, for example, that has no religious basis for an objection or no valid, reason under the school code, but is just concerned about a particular material or a particular lesson that's going to be taught, maybe because of something that happened to the student in the past. So as example of this, we've had parents come to us and say, okay, this student is going to read this book as part of a high school, AP honors English curriculum, and it does have a description in it of a suicide, or it has a description in it of a student being or a character in the book, experiencing sexual assault or sexual abuse. And, literature mirrors life. And so it sometimes has these, we're sometimes covering materials that have these subjects, especially with older children. And if a parent were to come to a teacher and say, my child experienced this trauma and I'm concerned about him or her reading this book, it's important that we respond in a reasonable way to that. And in a reasonable way means taking it seriously and seriously considering whether there is something else that we can provide. I'm not saying that you do that all the time, but I do think that there are valid concerns that parents can bring that if we respond appropriately, I think you'll end up with a less sort of, angry group of parents coming to the board meeting because you're showing that you're listening to people's individual needs. I also think it's really important to resolve these at the classroom department level. Sometimes we are reading materials or we're looking at things or we're studying things that can be upsetting. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to not study them or exempt everyone out from it, but to have the teachers really use their content expertise and explain, okay, this is why we watch this excerpt of Roots when we learn about slavery. And yes, it can be hard to watch, but we believe it is so critically important. And if you have concerns, talk to us about it. So engaging parents in discussion about why these things matters and why these things are valuable for children to learn, but approaching it from a very empathetic perspective. So important. And it's also important for kids to have a consistent experience. I think that, one of the main goals that, of public education is to make sure that people are learning the things that are really important, not just for their future success and their economic security, but also to be a participatory member of our society and to think critically and to make good decisions for themselves and for their future families. So just some lessons learned from curriculum objections that we have handled. I have found, or we have found, that where you have an explicit rationale and really a clear purpose, why it's important for kids to learn this, you are more likely to get a better response from parents and fewer curriculum objections. I think we're dealing right now because of what we've been through with the pandemic and just because of, the concerns that are so magnified by media attention, in some ways rightfully so, but in some ways to a degree that I think contributes to parental anxiety. So we're dealing with a lot of parents who have a lot of anxiety and making sure that parents are with you, that, taking the steps, being proactive, making sure the board is with you, making sure the board understands why certain things are being taught and how we can engage the board and parents in the curriculum, determination process, even having community groups to discuss, like, why is this important? And always being considerate of like a students' age levels, their maturity levels, what they're supposed to be learning at that time. That, I think, can really build trust and help you sort of deal with these things before you start to really have problems or people that are really making objections based on the fact they're upset. Like, that's not why we want people to make objections. We want people to bring forth valid concerns, but we don't want them to start off of a place of being upset because they don't understand or they feel like they haven't been fully informed. So going back to sort of the topic of school board curriculum adoption, again, I think this is something that you need to do from a place of like information, making sure the school board understands some of the rationales and but not getting down into the nitty gritty. Like, you would have board meetings that went till the cows came home or till the end of time if you had to discuss every single book that was in the library. So you want to think about how you're doing this and how this is happening in your community, again, to provide for transparency and for input and for buy-in and feedback, but not to get mired down into the, do we like this, 3-page storybook about penguins versus this one because of, where the eggs are laid or some such thing. People will find things, and we don't want to go to that level of detail. Again, all these are great tips. Determine when you're going to have proactive communication on a certain topic. Definitely, you're not going to talk about, sex ed with 10-year-olds before sending some sort of note home. Definitely, you're not going to watch a movie that shows something that might be emotionally upsetting, but is absolutely relevant without like previewing it for parents. Like, we've specifically selected these scenes and we've cut out these scenes in order to be mindful of the age of our students and what they're learning about. And we think this is best for considering their development in 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade, really making those connections and those tie-ins. Making sure you have a sound policy on the teaching of controversial subjects. This is also based in the school code, making sure you're addressing viewpoints, making sure your teachers are well educated so that teachers are teaching things that could have different opposing views in a way that allows the students to critically think and make their own determinations rather than being influenced or, inculcated by the teacher. I mean, we hear a lot of accusations of that, and a lot of times it's not happening, but we want teachers to be mindful. And sometimes teachers aren't as subtle or aren't as nuanced as they should be, and making sure you're really working with your teachers to capture that part of their job, to make sure that they're teaching things from an open perspective that allows differing views, but doesn't get out of hand. I think this is just a sample of that form. I don't know if we're going to start seeing this again in the fall because it basically makes you opt out of everything. I don't know. I think we have to start also thinking, and we welcome your ideas if you guys want us anything, ways to sort of build back trust and reaffirm that like this really is a good way to do things. I think as we work in schools, we often reflect on, what we got out of public education. And I think, we need to remember that so many of us have benefited so greatly from that. And how do we get parents to understand that, like, sometimes to go along and to learn and to be with different people really is a benefit. So just sort of highlighting, we're almost to the end of our time. The curriculum objection toolkit. This is just a one-stop package, and these are the things that are in it. You have a board policy, the list of statutory grounds, forms to request inspection of curriculum that are open to the community that you could put on your website if you want, forms to object to curriculum, a rubric so that your administrators can fairly and comprehensively evaluate requests, and then sample form letters so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time you have to make a response. We had some hypotheticals, but I'm not sure that we have time for those. Eliza, how many minutes do we have left? I don't have my glasses here. Oh, we're right at 12:30.
We're right at 12:30. Yeah. So, if people want to stay on, we can go through some of these. Otherwise, we can save them for another webinar. Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be updating this as well as some, I think for the beginning of the school year, another sort of relevant corollary topic might be the vaccine objections. So everyone have a good rest of the day, and thank you for joining us. If you have questions, feel free to send them along via email. I do see one. Oh, I see a question. So here's the question. So frequently the objection is about specific texts or topics within a particular text, and it's difficult to say that learning or standard skill development would not be possible without it. Yet the depth of thinking we can achieve by challenging ourselves to think differently or see through life through someone else's eyes is a key feature. So do you or do not select a text like this? You know, my view is that you need to select texts like this. You need to push the envelope a little bit in order to provide quality instruction. I mean, really, like the whole purpose of public education is to allow people to participate in a democracy. And you can't participate in the democracy unless you understand sort of opposing viewpoints. You're able to evaluate, you're able to critically think about topics. So I think you do want to look for rigor. You want to look for thinking of or choosing texts that have that appropriate rigor, but you also want to make sure that you're thinking about the age and the ability of the students to process this. And you also want to think about the ability of the teachers to communicate and to provide instruction in a way that reflects that depth and those perspectives. So I think that's a good question, and it's not really an answerable one from a legal perspective. But I think it's something that you can engage your faculty with and engage your administration with. And I think you should also engage, you know, to the extent that you can, engage like lay people, parents and board members who have an interest and who value kids that are taught with rigor and with materials that challenge them.
I think
All right.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.